going. This woman he's looking for named Beatrice, right? But this fictional story by Dante is such a big deal because it sets the tone of Renaissance writings going forward and makes it so fictional literature and epic poetry makes a return, right? These writings are phenomenally important, and these are all going to be, all these guys are going to be in the matching section of your test, so make sure you pay special attention, okay? Now, then we've got Petrarch, okay? Now, Petrarch is more of the model, okay? Petrarch is one of the founders of the Renaissance, right? Fun fact, Petrarch actually might have known Dante. His father definitely knew Dante, right? They actually communicated with each other and stuff like that. But Petrarch is his last name. His first name is Francesco, all right? So Francesco Petrarch is one of the founders of the Renaissance and is considered the father of humanism, right? Because he begins to take the ideas of St. Thomas Aquinas, take the ideas of Dante, and mesh them together in the ideas of humanism, right? He loved translating old Roman works, really starts his works in the early 1340s, translated Roman texts by people like Livy and Titus and Epicurus and all these other famous Roman philosophers. He even wrote letters to them, right? Even though they were dead for like over 1,000 years, he would be like, Livy, I so forlorn the fact that I was not in your time or you were not in mine, right? He believed that the Romans were the most smart people that ever came around ever. He translated the works of Cicero and Caesar and stuff like that. And he's beginning to bring back or rebirth the ideas of the ancient Romans and the ancient Greeks, right? Which is the entire premise of humanism and what the Renaissance is founded on, right? He also apparently has a very famous work where he climbed a mountain just to see the view, right? So there's this famous story about him where he says, I climbed Mount Venus, right? And Mount Venus is a very, very tall peak outside of Rome, right? And outside of Rome, Mount Venus is like never apparently been climbed since the ancient Roman period, but he climbed to the top of it, not to get closer to God, but just to see the view, right? So like just to see the view that ancient Romans used to look upon all the time, right? Because he wanted to kind of make a humanist effort in and of himself. Now, notice he's breaking away from theology. Now, he did say that apparently, like, if you do things like this, if you climb this mountain, it will bring you closer to God, but it's not about God in and of that essence, right? It's about you, your personal strive, your personal forward, your personal growth, right? Just go up there and just see the view because it exists here in this worldly place. He also, fun fact, is going to be the person that coins the term Dark Ages in reference to the Middle Ages, right? He's the one that referred to the Middle Ages as the Dark Ages because they had plummeted down and all of the Roman goods and things were gone, right? And he also created the study of this concept of the liberal arts, right? He believed that education should be much more well-rounded, right? That people should not only learn the Bible, but they should also learn Roman texts, learn translations, learn how to translate, learn to read Latin, learn rhetoric, which was a big thing, how to write, how to argue effectively, how to use grammar more properly, right? And so that's why we call him the father of humanism, right? Now, the next thing you need to understand before we go any further is how fast are these writings spreading around, right? St. Thomas Aquinas, Dante, Petrarch, all those guys had to write all of their books by hand, right? And if copies were ever done of them, they also had to be written by hand. Like, for example, we got a couple pictures right here. This is one of the earliest copies of the Divine Comedy. It's from circa 1390, right? Probably about like 20 to 30 years after Dante had already died. And this is a very famous scene right here that we talked about today in class. Remember, girls that were in class today? The lion, the wolf, and the leopard came flying down the side of the mountain to tell Dante to back up and turn back. And here's Virgil right here who shows up in the forest and stuff like that. It shows him through hell and stuff like that. Abandon all hope, ye who enter here. I need that sign, Megan Wolf. I need it. All right, so now the big thing about it, though, in general, is that is one of the earliest copies. But look at this, y'all. This is hand decorated. This is all painted and drawn by hand. All of the words are written by hand. All of the manuscripts are done by hand. That makes these books extremely rare. They are handwritten. They are hand decorated. The copies take forever. And write this down, y'all. Books that Dante, Petrarch, and St. Thomas Aquinas wrote were also very expensive, right? Like so, because the thing about it is they were basically works of art in and of themselves. But then something amazing is going to happen. And this bad boy gets invented, right? None other than Johannes Gutenberg's printing press, right? Which shout out Mr. Waterson, because I know apparently he talked to y'all about this. That guy just sent from heaven, right? So the big thing about it, though, in general, all right, is Johannes Gutenberg is going to create the printing press, right? And he prints the Bible first, go figure. But the thing about it that you need to understand is that Johannes Gutenberg created the very first, put this word in here somewhere, movable type printing press, right? Now, how did this device work? What would you do with it? How did you actually make something printed? How did you print anything at all on this printing press? Well, the way you did it was you would have these little things called types, right? And these little things called types look kind of like Scrabble tiles, right? They're little Scrabble tiles that were raised up, and it would be like an A, a B, a C, a D, but you could kind of pick them up independently, right? And if I wanted to make a piece of paper that said, Mr. Wooderson is my hero, is the title of this book that I'm going to do, I'm going to take an M, a capital M, an uppercase M, because he kept all the capital letters on the upper cases above your head because he didn't use them as often. That's why they called them uppercase letters and lowercase letters, because the lower ones were there for easy reaching, right? So now, the big thing about it, though, in general, is I'll take an M, and then a little R, and then a period, and then a big W from the uppercase, and then an O, and then an O, and then a D, and then an E, then an R, then an S, then an N, and I would line them all up, give it a space, line all the next word up, give it a space, I would cover it in ink, and then I would put it inside of this device, put a piece of paper right there, and press it, kind of like exactly like a stamp, right? And then I'm going to do it, though, multiple different times. I'm going to do it hundreds of times so I can create a cheaper and more accessible book, right? A text, a better text, right? But it's going to be much cheaper because it's not handwritten anymore. It's not hand decorated anymore. This is going to cause literacy rates to explode. The printing press is very important, and it's going to be important to the progression of European history for the next several hundred years, right? So looking at this thing as well, Gutenberg's press, though, is it the first one? No. It's important to actually discuss that really quickly, right? They're Asian kingdoms, and they're in the Manchu marketplace period, actually created printing presses over 100 years before Gutenberg ever created his. The only major difference between them was the fact that Gutenberg's was made out of metal, right? And the Asiatic ones were made out of wood. The types for the wooden ones would actually degrade a little bit faster. They soak ink up a lot and stuff like that, whereas Gutenberg's printing press was made out of metal and was a little bit more sturdy and stuff like that, right? So what you're going to understand, though, is not only is Gutenberg's press going to be very important, but now print shops are going to be able to show up all over northern Italy, up in the Holy Roman Empire, and in these centers of economic activity. And, big thing as well, jot this down, print shops eventually become centers of propaganda, right? Which is a big thing as well when we get into the Reformation, okay? Now the thing, so we got one more. We got one more big one that we got to talk about, and then we got to go over him, and we got to make sure you know him, and you got to get after it, and his name is none other than Niccolo Machiavelli. Niccolo Machiavelli is probably the most important out of all these writers outside of Dante, right? I would say Dante and him rival each other as the same. Dante's the most important writer pre-printing press. Machiavelli is the most important writer post-printing press because he wrote this right here, this famous book known as The Prince, right? The Prince by Niccolo Machiavelli is probably the most important writing to come out of the Renaissance in its entire movement, okay? Niccolo Machiavelli, when he wrote The Prince, he tried to explore one philosophical construct. What is the best style of government, and how should a ruler rule over his people, right? And so the thing about it is he was inspired by this, okay? So just to give you some background on Niccolo Machiavelli. Niccolo Machiavelli is from Florence, right? He's from Florence, Italy. And so what other family is also from Florence, Italy? Oh, nothing other than the Medici, right? And apparently after the wake of this crazy monk named Girolamo Savonarola took over, and he kind of had everybody in Florence burn a bunch of stuff. Oh, fun fact, Elena Savage, your Birth of Venus was almost burned when this crazy monk took over Florence. Well, when this crazy monk took over Florence, he ran the Medici family out, and they were in exile for quite some time. Well, after that crazy monk ends up getting killed by the church, and the Pope has him burned at the stake and stuff like that at the Bonfire of the Vanities, or after the Bonfire of the Vanities, this guy named Piero Soderini comes in and takes over in the wake of the absence of the Medici family. And Machiavelli is his assistant, right? And then here come the Medici back. They raised an army. They retake over Florence. Machiavelli ends up getting tortured by the Medici family, gets arrested, gets beaten, and then gets exiled out of Florence, right? And while he was exiled outside of Florence, he began to ask himself, after all that political turmoil, after a crazy monk shows up and burns everything, and then after this other guy shows up, and then after the Medici raise an army back and come back in, he wanted to ask himself, if a monarch is in charge and if rulers are in charge, is it better for that ruler to be feared or loved? What is better here? What is the better cocktail of all this stuff, right? Is it better for that ruler to be feared or loved, okay? Because he said, in the long run, let's go ahead and answer his question. What do you guys think? What do you think he said? I see a lot of nods. I see a lot of heads moving and stuff like that. Some of y'all might say loved because maybe you'll be less likely to act out against him if you love them. But some people say feared because you say you wouldn't want to be taken advantage of, right? Well, the thing about it is Machiavelli said that it's better for a ruler to be both if he can. But if he has to pick one, he needs to be feared, right? Because if you are feared, then you are going to be able to live effectively, rule effectively, and you will always know that the ends will justify the means. What he basically advocated for was a cunning, ruthless ruler, right? Somebody that shows like the qualities of a wolf and a fox, right? Being intelligent and also very kind of malicious at times when they needed to be, right? And so the thing about it, though, is there's one very, very important little quote that goes along with this as well, okay? He said that, yes, a ruler must be feared or loved. Yes, whatever. You should be both, but it's better to be feared. But he also said you shouldn't be hated, because if you are hated, the people will simply rise up against you and overthrow your government, right? And that little book became one of the most important tomes of political development going forward for the next several hundred years. But that right there is it. That's the Renaissance writers we needed to talk about. I'll see y'all soon. Y'all have a good one.